For most people today, money feels simple. Coins, notes, numbers on a screen. But for more than 95% of human history, none of that existed. No coins, no paper money, no banks as we know them. Yet civilizations rose, cities expanded, long-distance trade flourished, and complex economies functioned for thousands of years. To understand how money worked before coins existed, we must forget modern assumptions. Because early economies were not built on metal or paper. They were built on trust, obligation, memory, and survival. Around 10,000 BC, humanity crossed a turning point. People stopped moving constantly and began settling permanently. Agriculture replaced hunting and gathering. Villages formed near rivers and fertile land. For the first time, humans produced more food than they could immediately consume. This surplus changed everything. Once surplus existed, inequality existed. Some families stored grain, others specialized in tools, pottery, or labor. Exchange became unavoidable. This was the birth of economic systems. The earliest form of exchange was barter. Grain was exchanged for tools, meat for pottery, labor for food, services for protection. But barter had a fundamental limitation. Exchange only worked if both parties wanted what the other offered at the same time. If a farmer wanted tools, but the toolmaker did not want grain, no trade happened. This problem became more serious as societies grew larger. Barter could not scale. So humans did not invent coins first. They invented units of value. Before coins, societies relied on what historians call commodity money. These were real goods that functioned as money because everyone agreed they had value. Not because a king declared them money, but because society trusted them. Different regions used different commodities depending on environment and culture. In Mesopotamia, barley and wheat in parts of Africa and Europe, cattle in the Mediterranean, salt in coastal regions, shells in early farming societies, copper and bronze tools, these commodities shared three essential qualities. They were widely needed. They were difficult to fake. They were limited in supply. Among all of them, grain became the most important. In ancient Mesopotamia, barley became the standard measure of value. Wages, rents, taxes, loans, and fines were calculated in grain units. Even when grain was not physically exchanged, value was still measured in grain. This is a crucial point. Money already existed as an abstract concept. People thought in units of value, not objects. One of the most misunderstood truths of history is this writing was not invented for stories, religion, or poetry. Writing was invented for economics. Around 3200 BC, Sumerian scribes began recording transactions on clay tablets. These tablets listed debts, wages, inventories, and taxes. They recorded who owed what to whom and when. Money existed as records, not metal. These records were enforced by institutions, not markets. In early civilizations, temples were not just places of worship. They were economic centers. Temples stored grain, livestock, silver, textiles, and tools. They managed surplus. They issued loans. They collected repayments. Farmers borrowed grain before planting season and repaid after harvest. Interest was charged, often in grain. Everything was measured, recorded, and enforced. This system worked because temples were trusted, permanent, and powerful. They were, in every meaningful sense, the first banks in human history. Another widespread misconception is that silver became money only after coins. This is historically incorrect. Silver functioned as a unit of account thousands of years before the first coin existed. In Mesopotamia, values were measured in shekels of silver. But silver was not minted, it was weighed. A debt tablet might say, 10 shekels of silver owed. No coin existed, only weight and trust. Silver allowed different commodities to be compared under one standard of value. Labor itself was also a form of money. Before coins, workers were paid in food, clothing, shelter, and protection. In ancient Egypt, laborers building temples and state projects were paid in bread and beer. Wages were calculated carefully and distributed regularly. This was not barter. It was a wage system without coins. Money meant access to resources, not possession of metal. Taxation also existed long before coins. People paid taxes in grain, livestock, or labor. States collected these resources and redistributed them to soldiers, officials, and administrators. This allowed governments to function without any circulating currency. Economic power came from control of surplus, not coins. Perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of early economics is this debt existed before cash. People owed grain, labor, or silver units recorded on tablets. Failure to repay debt could result in loss of land, forced labor, or debt bondage. Money evolved not to eliminate debt, but to measure and control it. By this point in history, Money already existed in every functional sense. It measured value. It recorded obligation. It enabled trade. It supported states, all without coins. The real currency was trust. Trust in records, institutions, and enforcement. And as long as that trust existed, money did not need to be physical. As long as early economies remained local, these systems worked. Grain stored in temples, debts recorded on clay tablets, silver measured by weight, and labor paid in food were enough to keep societies running. But history never stands still. As populations grew, cities expanded, and trade stretched beyond local regions, early money systems began to face pressure. Long-distance trade changed everything. By the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC, trade routes connected Mesopotamia to Anatolia, the Indus Valley, Egypt, and beyond. Goods now moved hundreds, sometimes thousands, of kilometers. Tin for bronze, timber for construction, precious stones, textiles, luxury goods. This kind of trade created new problems. Grain could not easily be carried long distances. Clay tablets worked only where institutions recognized them. Trust weakened once traders left their home cities. Money needed to become more portable and more universally trusted. This is where weighed metals became increasingly important. Silver, gold, and copper did not replace earlier systems overnight. They layered on top of them. Silver remained a unit of account, but now it traveled more frequently. Merchants carried weighed metal to settle balances across regions. Still, there were no coins. Every transaction required weighing metal. Scales mattered. Purity mattered. Trust still mattered. Metal was not valuable because of a face stamped on it. It was valuable because societies already trusted its weight and scarcity. Even at this stage, money was still not primarily an object. It was still a measurement system. Prices were listed in silver units, even when payment happened in other goods. A cow might be worth so many shekels of silver. A house might be worth many more. Metal made comparison easier, not authority stronger. As trade intensified, states became more involved. Governments needed to pay soldiers, administrators, and workers across large territories. They needed reliable ways to collect taxes and fund wars. But pre-coin systems were slow. Weighing metal for every payment wasted time. Verifying purity created disputes. Transporting large quantities was risky. Economic friction increased. This friction pushed societies towards standardization. It is important to understand something clearly here. Coins were not invented because people suddenly discovered money. Money already existed. Coins were invented because states needed efficiency and control. Around the 7th century BC, in regions like Lydia and western Anatolia, the first coins appeared. These early coins were made from electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. The innovation was not metal. The innovation was a state guarantee. A stamped symbol declared weight and purity without needing to measure every time. Trust moved from scales to authority. This shift changed how money functioned. Before coins, trust was institutional and communal. Temples, records, and social enforcement maintained value. With coins, trust became political. The state now certified money. This allowed faster transactions, easier tax collection, and standardized payments across large territories. Coins did not replace earlier systems immediately. For centuries, coins and older accounting systems existed side by side. Even after coins appeared, many wages were still paid in goods. Many taxes were still collected in grain. Many debts were still recorded, not settled instantly. Coins accelerated economies, but they did not redefine money. This leads to the most important historical conclusion. Coins did not create money. Coins simplified money. They compressed trust, accounting, and value into a single object, but the foundation remained the same. Before coins, money was stored in granaries, measured in silver units, recorded on clay tablets, enforced by institutions, expressed through labor and obligation. After coins, money still relied on trust, authority, and belief. The material changed. The logic did not. This is why modern money is still not fundamentally different. Today, most money does not exist as coins or paper. It exists as records. Bank ledgers, digital balances, debt obligations. The system has changed in speed and scale, but not in nature. Money is still a shared agreement about value. When people imagine a world before coins, they imagine chaos. In reality, those economies were organized, regulated, and deeply structured. They had wages, they had taxes, they had loans, they had interest, all without coins. Coins were never the beginning of money. They were the moment money became easier to carry, faster to move, and simpler to control. But the true origins of money lie much deeper, in surplus, in obligation, in record keeping, in trust, And that truth matters. Because once we understand how money worked before coins, we realize something uncomfortable. Money has never been about metal. It has always been about power, systems, and belief. Coins were just the first shortcut. The system behind them never disappeared.